All
Good
right.
morning. Welcome to the February 12th, 2021 edition of Bob's Coffee Chat. This is a weekly Friday morning Zoom meeting focused on surviving and thriving in the era of Corona. I am your host, Bob Bednars, and today's presentation is Finding Your Tribe, Crafting Professional Content that Connects. Let me say that again. Finding Your Tribe, Crafting Professional Content that Connects. That sounds more dramatic. Presented by Freya Shipley. And Freya is a marketing content writer specializing in customized precision brand voices. Her social science background gives her exceptional insight into the nuts and bolts of what makes commercial communications effective. Freya loves helping fellow business owners find the style that's authentic to them and that inspires genuine connection with prospects, customers, and clients. These last few weeks, I've had the opportunity to have some insightful discussions with Freya on writing content and style that has evolved in today's marketing. So Freya, how can we craft our professional writing content to connect better to our target market, our tribe?
Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you for the question, which I hope to answer, at least in part. And thank you to everyone for being here today. Yeah, as Bob just mentioned, I do have a background in academic social science. And when I started a while back writing professional content for businesses, it started to dawn on me that I really wanted a more systematic way to approach brand voice, something kind of less intuitive. And I wanted to create some kind of process that was repeatable for myself and for the other writers and business owners who I coached. So I want to show you a little bit about what I came up with. And I hope that at least some of these ideas will feel resonant and helpful to you. So to start with, has anyone here ever had that experience where you're in a conversation, you're talking with somebody, and you suddenly become aware of how you sound? And you realize, I actually talk differently depending on who I'm talking with? Raise hands, like, has that ever happened to anybody? Yay, you guys know what I'm talking about, absolutely. So yeah, maybe you have a certain way of interacting with your mom when you're talking to her, or it might be different, or it would be different when you're talking like to your dentist or President Biden, you know, whoever it might be. So I'd like to start with a little experiment for us all that I find empowering as a writer that relates to that idea. So grab something to write with, a little pen and paper. And I am going to tinker with my Canva here and hope to be presenting a slide that you guys can see. So what I'd like you to do is to imagine that you're sitting across the table, either from a young child who you know in real life and someone that you have an emotional connection with, or it could be a really close adult friend. It's your choice. I'd like you to pick someone that you really have an emotional bond with. I'm going to show you guys a picture, and I'm going to ask you to just take a few seconds and think about how you would describe what you're seeing to that person that you're sitting with. And you're only talking to that one person, and you want to do it in a way that makes sense to them. Okay. Just jot down whatever words or phrases spring to mind. We're not looking for anything coherent, just whatever thoughts come into your mind. Okay. See if I can do this. Try to go into present mode. Come on. There, oops. I skipped ahead. There we go. Okay, funny picture. So I hope everyone is seeing this clearly. So let's just take a few seconds, just jot down whatever springs to mind, really sink yourself into that scenario, almost like you're putting yourself in a little play. thinking of the person that you're talking to. Take about 30 seconds for that.
This is the point where I always
Okay.
say I should have some music to go with this.
I think we're about done. We're just doing this on the fly. So would anyone be willing to share something that you wrote? Maybe let's start with somebody who was talking to an adult friend. Is that Laura?
It is. You know, what I see in this picture is I think of Peter Rabbit, Benjamin Bunny, the whole family, Beatrice Potter. You know, family, babies, rabbits, kids. I'm a mom. I do other things. I have a business. That's what comes to mind.
Okay. And were you imagining yourself describing that to an adult buddy?
No, no, working with kids. I was thinking of the kids and, you know, the mischief they get into and how you relate, how you to teach them, not to punish them. Life has enough consequences, but help them to grow and be who they need to be. That's the way I was thinking about it.
Yeah, I could definitely see some feelings of nurturing coming up looking at this picture, and it totally looks like a Beatrix Potter picture.
Yeah, it really does.
Anybody else?
Can I say something? What's inhibiting me on this?
Okay.
Because I wrote down just when I looked at it. I just said they're cute little bunnies. They're so cuddly. They're so warm and they're so fuzzy. But if I was trying to describe this to President Biden, I'd be tongue-tied. I really wouldn't know what to say.
Well, yeah, I think it takes a little pressure off to imagine that we're talking to either a close friend, an adult friend, or else a little kid. But I noticed, Bob, you used the word bunnies instead of saying rabbits.
True,
so
I did.
That is a great example of a stylistic choice. Because if you think about it, those two words are pointing to exactly the same thing in the real world. But if we say bunnies, we're focusing more on that feeling of cuteness and awe and nurture and maybe talking to someone who's younger, that kind of thing. Let's hear from one more person, if possible. Would anyone speak up and tell us? Yeah, Zoe Marie?
What I wrote was hungry bunny rabbits.
Okay, and who were you imagining that you were speaking with?
I would speak to a friend called Greg Adams, a peer.
Okay, so hungry bunny rabbits. So they're so cute that you were moved to use the word bunny rabbits, even though you weren't speaking to a child, which I totally relate to. So this is just an experiment to show you guys that we all have an intuitive sense of linguistic style. We just don't necessarily know that we have it. As humans, we know how to adapt our speech to different people that we might be talking to, different social situations. You can imagine that there might be somebody who you could be speaking to that would inspire you to say, oh, I'm looking at a group of mammals feeding on vegetables. And that might feel more appropriate to a certain situation. So what I want to do now is make you all just a little bit more aware of what you already know to help you leverage this kind of style superpower that you already have. And then I want to take a quick look under the hood of what I do with all this when I'm writing branded content for clients. Some of this may sound a little theoretical because it is rooted in my social science background, But by the end, I hope to convince you guys that everything I'm talking about has really useful practical applications, and it's all directly relevant to what we're up to here, which is we all share this goal of creating marketing content that resonates and inspires action in the particular people that we want to reach. And then at the end, I'll give you a couple of handy tools that I hope will help you feel some momentum to set you off on your way of working on your own web content, or for the writers among us, maybe you're writing for somebody else. So back to that superpower that you have to change your style depending on the situation and depending on who you're talking with. You do it without even thinking. But if you wanted to, you could record yourself talking with your sister or your buddy or your professor or whoever it is. And then you could go and listen to that and start to figure out specifically what is it that you're doing that gives your conversation that particular distinctive feeling or flavor that it has. And that's actually what I did as a grad student. We recorded real life spontaneous conversations in a whole bunch of different real life situations. And then we scurried back to a lab and listened to our recordings, and we dissected those conversations to figure out kind of what made them tick. And this is just to give you an idea of the kinds of questions that we were looking at in those days. And you can see how this kind of thing led me right into looking at the job that we're doing as marketers and content writers. What exactly can we do with our words in order to create a feeling of intimacy or closeness with the person who's reading them? How do we go about sounding authoritative? How do we write content that gives the reader that feeling that we're all on one team, like you are one of us, that kind of great feeling? And what if we want to write like a website that sounds like spontaneous conversation, which is really appropriate in certain situations for certain businesses? How do we actually do that? So what we often do, as most of you will know, I think, we start by defining a brand personality. So we're working on content for a business. We envision that organization as if it were a person. We think about its goals, its mission, its ideals, its ethics, what kind of service or product it's offering. And we imagine all of that into a human personality, almost like a character in a play. And the end result of that process is usually a list of adjectives like this. So whatever this brand is that we're talking about, it has a brand personality that's edgy, inspiring, surprising, reliable, youthful, creative. I think that's really helpful to me as a writer, but it's not quite enough. If somebody handed me that list and said, go ahead and write me an about page that's edgy and reliable, I would actually need a little bit more information before I would feel able to go ahead and do that. So here's the part that often gets left out of this process. Brand personas, brand personalities come in pairs. They come in pairs naturally and automatically. If I create a website that is talking to readers in the persona of a teacher, like if that idea of teacher is defining the stylistic choices that I make, that means that I'm automatically putting my reader into the character of a student. The second example on here is a little bit goofy, but if you can imagine, I'm writing a web page where I'm talking as a restaurant server. Probably, no matter what I do, I'm going to be automatically casting my reader in the role of somebody in the restaurant placing an order. And it's the same thing, like if I'm talking as a lawyer, I'm going to be casting my reader as a client. And if I'm talking as like an excited, bubbly best friend, it's just natural that the reader is going to be cast in the role of another best friend, my best buddy. So I guess this is probably the most important insight that I had that I want to share with you guys. Every piece of branded content that you publish is actually signaling a particular relationship. It's inviting your reader into a particular relationship with you. And that's a relationship that's defined by the two roles that are involved: teacher, student, best friend, whatever it may be. I sometimes say branding is a magic mirror, because the way I see it, branded content offers us a certain image of ourselves when we visit a website. It's a vision of who we are or who we might be if we continue to engage with that organization. And a lot of marketers are really good at asking, well, who's the target audience? Who are we talking to? Which is great. But even then, we're usually not thinking super clearly about what specific relationship are we offering this reader. And it's got to be the relationship between my brand personality and that image, that persona that I'm offering my reader. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. Ashlyn Carter is a launch expert and a marketing coach. Her company is called Ashlyn Writes. Her content has a really clear persona that speaks in a very distinctive voice. This little quote that you're seeing here is a snippet from an email message that you get from her when you request one of her downloads. I'd like to ask, what do you guys notice about the style choices that she's making in that quote? Does anything jump out at you? And also, what kind of relationship do you think she's offering her reader? Anyone have thoughts on that? Zoya Marie?
She seems to. Yeah, no, what I see is this very gentle person being herself, and yet the red gives a sense of dynamic, like let's do it, but at the same time, there's a big balance between, and then the little verbiage on the left is kind of like, it's going to be simple. We're just going to do this. So I kind of feel like there's this combination of sensitivity, let's do it, and the red speaking very loudly, and that it's going to be dynamic.
I would definitely agree with that. I should say that the red part is me. Ashlyn's part is just the text in the white box. But yeah, the feeling of her business is gentle, and it's very authentic and personal. Anything else that jumps out at anybody?
Yeah, Laura had put in the chat that it looks like you're talking a best friend to a best friend, like you mentioned earlier.
Well, that is exactly what it is. Yeah. So this is an example, this brand, Ashlyn Writes, is an example of what I call a BFF brand relationship. She has a brand personality that's something like a really close friend who's chatting to you spontaneously about something that she's enthusiastic about. And when you visit her website, she puts you into the role of something like Ashlyn's best buddy who has a really warm personal relationship with her. And both of you are really enjoying content marketing on a kind of emotional level. And it's really fun. It's fun to engage with that. That's the image of ourselves that we see through her eyes. And then here is what the BFF relationship looks like when it's broken down into its elements. These are the main parameters that I look at when I'm dealing with brand voice. At the top, we have, and remember that this is all stuff that makes sense to you guys on an unconscious level. So I hope there's a feeling of familiarity about this. There is a particular kind of content that sounds typically written, a written style. When we see that, we know it. It's long sentences that are attached, clauses attached to each other with commas and semicolons. It's very information rich. It's carefully planned out. It uses vocabulary that maybe we don't hear that much in spoken conversation, like hitherto or something like that would be an extreme example. And then on the other end of that spectrum, there's language that is very much colloquial and spoken. So when I'm looking at a brand voice, that's one thing that I'm thinking about, like how typically written does this sound and how typically spoken does it sound? And with Ashlyn Wright, she's very much onto the spoken end of that spectrum. She does have some written elements in that she's got a lot of organized information and, you know, bullet points and very clear stuff that she's telling us. But the style that she does it in, you could see on the previous slide, it's very much the kind of thing that you would hear in an oral conversation. She says, hey girl. She doesn't say hello or greetings or anything. She says, hey girl. And then there's the OMG that could be conversation, or it could be reminding us of the feeling of sending a text with somebody. So she's got that very spoken style going on. And that also relates to number 2, which is formal style versus intimate style. One thing that Ashlyn does that sounds really intimate is she actually interrupts herself to stick in that little parenthetical piece where she's saying, here, thanks for downloading. I've given you what you asked for. It's landing in your inbox. And then she goes into this little playful fantasy about, no, actually, this isn't your inbox. We're together in your living room. And oh my God, I love what you've done with the place, the ficus plant. And she's really talking about your email inbox, but it's a way she's inviting you to play a little game with her. And any kind of playfulness that we use in business content automatically reads as an invitation to intimacy, to a sense of a personal one-on-one relationship with that person, with the business. Number 3 is a really interesting one to me. Some content sounds more planned, some sounds more spontaneous. All marketing content is actually planned, right? Because we work on it very hard and we're very careful to make sure that it's saying what we want to say. But there are ways to create the illusion that you're actually interacting with the person that who's reading your content. And one way to do that is to stick in these little parenthetical intrusions or interruptions. Sometimes linguists call those embroideries. And the feeling there is, I'm talking to you, I'm giving you my message, but then something so interesting or exciting occurred to me that I want to say just to you. And I have to interrupt myself to say it. And that creates the illusion of what sometimes is called fresh talk, or something really spontaneous is being said. Okay. How much emotion do you reveal in your content? And then number 5 is the issue of authority. If you are the author of the website or the case study or the newsletter or whatever it may be, you automatically have authority. So the question is, what do you do with that in relation to your reader? Do you emphasize your authority? Do you make it very clear that you have this status and this expertise? Or do you choose to downplay it? Ashlyn very much downplays her authority. Even though she's giving us valuable information, she's teaching us to do stuff, the way she presents it is, you and I are on a level here. Our relative statuses are pretty much even. How you tweak that 5th parameter, that authority thing, really makes a big difference to how your brand voice sounds. So If you are writing in a brand voice that you have decided is going to be one of these best friend type voices, oops. I was going to show you some more nitty-gritty details about what that looks like, but that's going to come up in a second. So this is the 4 big families of brand voice relationship that I have identified. Just about any brand voice that you work on is going to fit into one of these groups. We just looked at the BFF one. There's another one that I call guide, which is the business voice, the voice of you as the author, and seeker, which is the persona of the reader or the person visiting your website. In a guide-seeker relationship, there's a little bit more of a difference in authority. It's still very friendly and warm and kind of casual, but in this kind of relationship, you probably wouldn't do a lot of joking around. You're not working that hard to make it sound like you have a personal relationship with the person that you're talking to. The leader-learner type relationship, this is where your own expertise as a professional is very important. And your reader is there to learn from you, and you are not at all trying to hide the fact that you know something that they don't. So this might be a business where you're selling something that involves security or trustworthiness, mortgages, insurance, something like that. Your reader is coming to you because they want your expertise and they want to know that you have that. And then finally, I've got the one I'm calling the visionary idealist. This is a brand, the visionary brand is one that really focuses on what that vision of the reader is, that it's that brand is a magic mirror thing. Again, you're focusing very much on the self-image of the reader who's visiting you. An example of this that I like is the J. Peterman Company, which some of you guys may know or remember. This is supposedly a product description for this blazer that they sell or they sold. If you look at the copy here, it's entirely a description of the way they want the reader to picture himself if he interacts with the company and buys the blazer. It's almost nothing to do with the blazer itself. So I'll give you a second to look at that. So I just think this can be really entertaining to look at companies that do this. And again, the defining characteristic here is that the business is focusing its marketing effort on offering either a very high status aspirational self-image for the reader. That could be one of those companies that uses words like excellence and elite a lot, or it could be something like Peterman, where they're just offering these kind of romantic stories about who you might be if you buy their product or service. Okay. So I'm going to go back to thinking about the best friend style. These are a few of the nitty-gritty tools that we can use linguistically if we want to create that intimate, personal spoken style that gives the illusion that we're actually interacting with the reader. There's a lot of people who are working on professional content who kind of lean in this direction. They want this kind of conversational style. And I think it's great for a lot of people. It's not necessarily the ideal for every business, but one thing you can do here is to address the reader as you, as opposed to some third person form like saying, the website visitor should XYZ. Talk in terms of you and me, or you and us. And we saw Ashlyn earlier actually saying, hey girl, which is like an even more casual, intimate version of addressing someone as you. Next, we talked about the little parenthetical interruptions that sound like fresh talk. This can be a really important piece of information about your product or service, or it can be a joke or something that's cracking you up. And in that case, the whole point of it is to create that dynamic of intimacy. I'm checking our time. Okay. If you want to sound like conversation, think in terms of sentence fragments. So you're really thinking in terms of ideas that maybe are not whole grammatically formed sentences. You may remember that Ashlyn did a little bit of that on hers. If you look at her website more, she does it all over the place. So feel free to just work with sentence fragments instead of full sentences. Make mistakes and then either correct them or just let them stand the way you would in a natural conversation. Ashlyn says things like, oops, wait a second, or hey, wait, what? And as soon as a writer says something like that, you can just hear them talking to you in your head. Use spellings that reflect the sounds of spoken words. There's a whole bunch of examples of that I'm sure you can think of yourself. One thing that I like to do is, if I want to create that feeling with a reader of we're all in one community together, like I get you guys and you get me, quote a shared cultural reference of some kind, something that they relate to that they'll recognize. When someone does that, when a writer does that and they pick the right reference, it really gives you that feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm home, like I'm with kindred spirits here. One of the examples here that I have came up recently, I was working with a psychotherapist who's starting a private practice, and she wanted to move her target audience in a certain direction, maybe toward people of a certain age who have a certain background. So we thought, hey, how about putting a quote from Alan Watts there? Because that's going to be somebody who's going to resonate for these folks. And Monty Python, of course, is one that I do with my brother all the time to reinforce the bond that we have. Okay. What else have we got here?
Are we going to be talking about the Spanish Inquisition?
Oh, can we? Can we spend our Q&A time like quoting Monty Python together?
I think we're dating ourselves.
So this is
Go
so
with
that
the
you
comfy
guys,
chair.
the comfy chair, put her in the comfy chair. No, three tools. Fear, surprise, fanatical devotion to the Pope. So thinking about those tools that we were just looking at, this is another quote from Ashlyn, from one of her blog posts. You can really see what those tools look like when they're in the flow of a piece of text. She says, y'all know I love me some workflow action. How conversational could you get? She says, remember when social media was fun? Yep, me too. So she says, yep, which is creating the illusion that you're actually giving her feedback and she's getting it. And, you know, we all know that's an illusion kind of, but it gives us that warm, fuzzy feeling that she's hearing us and responding. And then at the end of this little quote, you can see she's got one of those parenthetical interruptions where she says something and then she says, no, I thought of a better way to say it. So that's what that looks like. So before we wrap up, I want to make it clear that we talked about these 4 families of brand relationship. This is not to say that there are basically only 4 relationships or that you can offer your readers, or 4 brand voices that you can do. There is a ton of room in every one of these for a lot of creativity and a lot of tweaking of where those sliders are on the parameters that we looked at. But what it does, identifying the brand family that you're working in, what that does is it gives you a palette that you can then experiment with. Like if you're writing in a BSF style, you know for sure that you're going to want to be working on the spoken end of the written versus spoken spectrum. You're going to want to be on the intimate side of the formal versus intimate. So immediately, like that takes a bunch of options out of the way so you don't have to think about them. And it gives you your little painterly palette that you can work with as a writer. Okay. So back to this list of adjectives that we looked at earlier. I'm checking to see how much time we have. I'm actually not going to go through all this in too much detail because we're just about out of time. But I want to show you.
We got, it's 11:40, so you've got a good 15, 20 minutes left. So.
Okay, so let's talk about this more. So we've got our list of adjectives that are describing this business, whatever it is that we're working for. But here, we have a much more granular idea of what's actually going on in that brand voice. So the way these sliders are set here, and this list of adjectives, these are both talking about the same organization. And for me as a writer, it's more helpful to have guidance like this. The one at the bottom, I don't know if you can tell what that's supposed to be, but plus authority means this voice is very much stressing their own expertise and authority. The other end of that spectrum would be the minus authority, where they would be playing it down. But we know here we're writing in a voice that's emphasizing professional expertise, and we're not trying to hide that from our reader. This is a leader-learner type brand, as you can tell from the fact that the authority slider is all the way over on the left. It also has some of the visionary idealists mixed in. So it is very possible to mix different brand families when you're tinkering with all this stuff. So we know that we're going to want to lean toward content it's more text-like and less conversational. It's a little more formal than what we saw with Ashland. But there are still some elements of intimacy, like signals of intimacy going on in the stylistic choices. The information on this business's website is very planned. They're not trying to make it sound like spontaneous conversation. And although there is a little bit of emotion, like mostly enthusiasm that they're showing, it's not super emotional. So this is going to sound very different from the Ashland Wrights brand voice. So this is an example of an actual headline from this company. So the company is Apple. If you look on their site, they have headlines that include a little bit of teasing and joking. Like there's a little pun here about the word charge. But in the actual content of what they're describing, like all the body content, they don't do that at all. It's very serious and full of what some people might consider to be brand jargon, technical specs. But once in a while, there'll be one of these little headlines that's signaling, hey, there is some personal connection going on here. There is some intimacy going on. And here's a bit more off their current website. You can get a better sense of how they're doing it. So above this, there might be one of those little jokey, punny headlines. Here, they're talking about the technical specs of what they're talking about. They're framing the reader in a certain way. And again, I'd like to ask you guys what you think that is. Like, how do you think they're inviting you to see yourself in this piece of text? Are you waving, Laura? No?
I can go.
Bob? Yeah, please do.
Okay, so it's a lot of detailed technical jargon, and to me, to read that just as technical jargon, I feel stupid. But if I get the cute little thing of free to charge and stuff at the top of it, it's like, oh, okay, I get where they're going with this. You know, I hate to say it of myself, but they're dumbing it down for me, so I understand what the detail is that I'm reading.
Oh boy, I would never put it that way, but I know what you mean. I know that feeling for sure. Yeah, and if you look at the end here, they're saying they start addressing you as you again. So that's one of our little signals of personal connection. Whether you're layering dozens of tracks and effects, rendering 3D models, or compiling and testing code, you'll be doing it in no time flat with our great MacBook Pro or whatever it is. They're presenting an image of you as somebody who does this kind of hip, edgy, intense, creative work that is also very technically skilled. So when I read this, I feel like, wow, yeah, I'm like this person who's surfing, you know, technical expertise and creativity at the same time. And I find that really appealing in a brand voice. So yeah, it's like they're holding up a little mirror, and if you like the way you see yourself in that mirror, you're going to be inclined to keep on reading and keep on interacting with them. And in relation to what you said just now, Bob, about the technical information, this is like a modest example of that. There are places on this site where they're giving product descriptions that have way more of that. My theory about that is that we don't actually have to understand what a lot of that stuff means. I'm sure a lot of readers do understand it, but for those of us who don't, we get the point about the hipness, the edginess, the youthfulness, the technical expertise, the fact that this company is very high status, where it's almost like they're saying, I'm inviting you guys into a little exclusive club where we talk like this. And I'm paying you the compliment of assuming that you understand some of this. So really, those technical specs are not there to give you detailed information about the technical stuff. They're there to make you feel like you're in a certain in-group, if that makes sense. Another example of this that I like to give is IKEA. You go to IKEA and there's all of these products that have names that are Swedish words and phrases. And there is no way most of us are going to know what those mean. But that's really beside the point, because the reason they're there is to give us a feeling like, wow, I'm a person who shops at a European furnishing store, and I belong with the people who speak European languages. And that kind of gives me a certain sense of who I am when I shop at IKEA. Okay. Most of what I've been showing you guys, oops, wait a second before we go to that. Most of the stuff I'm showing you is stuff that I think about myself when I'm working on business content. It's not stuff that I usually try to explain to clients. So I'm kind of just putting it all out there and hoping that some of this feels helpful to you. I do work with some people who are interested in learning to write their own marketing content, to write in a particular voice. So when I do writing coaching, what I normally end up showing people is lists of specific techniques like this. So we'll say, okay, we figured out that you want to move your brand voice in the direction of being more intimate and personal. Here's a bunch of stuff we can try. And we try one thing after another. We play around with it. We throw some things out. We pay attention to what the business owner likes and what they don't like. I don't usually try to talk to them a lot about the brand families or the details about what I see going on, like in this piece of text. So I want to mention that if anybody is interested in like seeing more lists of those kind of toolkits for sounding conversational, toolkits for sounding authoritative, toolkits for sounding spontaneous, please feel free to email me and I can send you some of that information. But then just to help you get going with some of this stuff, these are the important ideas that I'd like you to take away from this today. Brand personalities come in pairs. So anytime you're thinking about a persona for your business or someone else's, keep in mind, what is the interlocking personality that you're offering the reader? What specific relationship are you offering to people who come and visit your website? And then in terms of the 4 brand relationship families that we looked at, do you think this business is more of a leader, a guide, a visionary, or a best buddy? And then a technique that I really like to do that is very freeing, write first drafts with a specific person in mind, like we did in our little exercise at the beginning. Speak just to that person in your mind and try not to edit yourself. We often have a tendency to want to sound more correct. So we start editing our copy to sound a little bit more textbooky or something like that, and a little bit less wacky. But the little weird details are the things that are going to end up defining the voice once you identify the ones that you like. As you write, keep a written list for yourself of techniques that you've tried that work well for you. Do I like using humor? Is there slang that sounds good to me? And if so, what particular slang do I want to use? Do I like the idea of including some inspiring quotations that remind the reader that we're all one big happy family here? Or maybe you want a more written style. So you want to have more literate sounding sentences that have 2 or 3 clauses connected together with punctuation. Keep track of those things that you like and keep recycling them back into future drafts. And the more you do that, the more your voice will emerge. And then the last thing on the list here is super helpful to me. Look at copy that sounds good to you already. If I work with a client who already likes the way their brand and voice sounds, I can look at their favorite piece of content and reverse engineer what's going on in it by using these ideas. And that enables me to write a bunch more of it for them that sounds the same way as the piece that they liked. And that also is something that I can do along with the client if I'm coaching them on writing their own content. So finally, why is this brand voice stuff so important? One question that I get fairly often is, can't I just say what I need to say and not really worry about a particular brand voice? Isn't it kind of, gilding the lily, something that might be nice, but it's not necessary really for making our marketing content land? The way I think about it, we are now living in a world where traditional advertising doesn't really work that well anymore. It's a lot more effective to build an authentic relationship with people over time. I'm so bad at overusing that word authentic, but sometimes it's just really tempting. I can't resist. Brand voice is an essential part of building that kind of relationship. Branded content feels more human, more personal. It's about relationships, specific relationships, and it's about telling stories that have a personal impact. To do it well, we need to let go of the idea that we're going to be all things to all people, because that's just not really feasible, I think, anymore. So we're going to go ahead and commit to speaking in a way that really resonates for that segment of people that we're aiming for, our ideal kindred spirits, which is why I'm calling this Finding Your Tribe. Because that's what inspires that feeling of recognition that we're all looking for in our professional content. We want our readers to feel like, oh, these folks get me. I'm in the right place. So thank you. Those are my thoughts on brand voice.
Thank you, Freya. Boy, this is great information. I'm definitely going to be using a lot of it for myself. And again, thank you for making this an excellent coffee chat.
Thank you so much. It was a delight.
Thank you.